guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is part 2 to my trends video. This is a slightly unplanned sequel. I wasn't actually planning on doing a part 2, but I got so many questions about different bags and different styles in the comment section of my first trends video that I decided to do a second one just to kind of address all those questions. So exactly the same format as the last one. I'm just going through different bag styles or particular bags and giving my thoughts about whether I think they're going to last for a really long time or if they are more on the trendy side. As always, this is literally just me guessing, so these really are my best guesses. This isn't based on anything other than my thoughts, and even then I don't always have the strongest thoughts about these things, so this is just if I had to guess what I think. And I do have to put a little disclaimer in here because there's always those 1 or 2 people, but I always say just buy what you love, because actually what makes a good purchase is whether you love it and you wear it a lot, regardless of whether it goes in and out of trends lists. So buy what you love. But with that said, I hope you guys enjoy this video and let's get started. I did also want to mention that a big sale has gone live in the US. I mentioned it elsewhere, but I wanted to mention it quickly here just in case you missed it, because it is an amazing sale. It's 20% off the entire site at Barneys, and there are no exclusions except for beauty. Literally every single brand is included, from Christian Louboutin shoes to Valentino bags, Saint Laurent bags, Prada bags. Everything is included, and I've never seen a discount code that's that generous with no exclusions except for beauty. So definitely one worth checking out if you did have your eye on something. It's only live until the 3rd of July. I do have a whole blog post with all of my picks, and I cover bags, shoes and SLGs, so I'll leave that down below if you did want to check it out. But I'll also leave the direct link to the sale and also the discount code that you're going to need to shop it. So the first bag that I was asked about is the Loewe bag. If that's how you say the name. I've never said it out loud and I had to Google it, so Vogue told me it was pronounced Loewe. I'll put it on screen just in case, but it is the puzzle bag, and I have seen this bag around a lot. It's not something that I would really go for, but I have seen a lot of people really wear it so well, and I do think it's super chic. This is one that I'm really not that sure in because I'm not that familiar with the brand, but if I had to guess either way, I think it was probably going to go more the way of the Fendi Peekaboo, and I mentioned this kind of concept in my last trends video, where there are some bags which are really popular but they also kind of chug along, as I said there, versus, you know, the super it bags which really rise in popularity but then fall quite steeply. And I do see this as more of an under the radar bag. I don't necessarily think it's going to be around in 10 years time, but if I had to guess a shelf life, I'd say maybe 2 to 4, maybe 2 to 5 years. I think it's quite a minimal style which really helps it. It is quite, I feel like it's almost like a cult favorite bag brand. You know, it's not one of those really flashy brands, but people who really like bags seem to like this brand a lot. So I do think it has a decent amount of staying power. As I said, the fact that it's very minimal I think does help it. So if I had to guess, I'd say 2 to 5 years, but obviously that is a very general estimate. But certainly if I was looking at the bag, I wouldn't have any qualms at, you know, its longevity. I do think it's a very lovely looking bag, and I think the brand has pretty good staying power. Next up are bucket bags, and I always try and show a bag if I can, just because I think it breaks it up a little bit rather than me just talking at the camera for 30 minutes. I don't have a kind of proper traditional bucket bag, but my nearest one is this Prada style, which kind of has the shape of a bucket bag but isn't really a traditional one. But regardless of the variation, I do think that bucket bags are probably here to stay, just because they have been around for a really long time, and usually the longer the style has been around, the less likely it is to kind of suddenly drop out of favor, you know. And obviously, you know, brands have been doing them for a very long time. They became much more popular when Mansa Gavriel released their first versions, and then lots of other luxury brands followed. But I still think that it's such a classic style that I just don't see it going anywhere. And I think much like the camera bag, it's just a style which luxury houses are going to keep returning back to, because it is just one of those classic silhouettes. So regardless of the brand, I think this one is a pretty safe bet if you were looking at it. Obviously different brands will kind of have different longevity, but generally speaking, I think bucket bags are a pretty safe bet. Next up are velvet bags, and I have one of mine right here, which is the Saint Laurent Sunset, and I do think that velvet is going to be around for quite a while yet, just because it's such a classic fabric, and it's more of a new thing that velvet bags have become popular. But velvet as a fabric has always been used, especially, you know, during the colder months, obviously. I do think of it specifically as a more festive fabric. You know, it is something you see a lot more around the holiday season, but despite that, I don't really think it's going to harm kind kind of velvet bag's longevity too much, and I think it is just quite a classic fabric and a very festive look. So even though these aren't, you know, the most practical bags and you certainly can't really wear them all year round for any occasion, I do think that they're obviously very lovely to wear in winter, and I don't really see these going anywhere. I kind of think of these very similar to the over-the-knee boot trend, which I think everyone thought was only going to be around for a season or two, and they're still going strong several years later, and I do think that velvet bags are going to be along those same lines. My next item isn't actually a bag, but it's a belt, and this is the only non-bag item, but someone asked me about this and I thought it was a good one to discuss. So this is the Gucci Marmont belt, and I think this one is a bit of a 50-50 one. I think that logo belts in general are going to become increasingly popular. I do not think we've seen the last of those. I think they're going to continue to be produced by fashion houses, and I think people continue to buy and wear them. The Gucci Marmont belt is a little bit different, I think, because even though it kind of started the whole trend, I feel, of logo belts, again, it kind of suffered from that whole, it was so crazy popular, and I think it just, the hype is dying down a bit. So I think that this is going to still be popular for the next couple of years. Do I think that we'll be still wearing them in 5 years? I don't think so anymore. I could be wrong, and definitely, certainly in the next year or so, I still think we're going to continue to see them around a lot. I think lots of people are going to continue to wear them. I still wear mine quite happily, so I don't think they're going anywhere in the kind of near future, but I'd be surprised if we were still wearing these in 5 years' time. The next bag I was asked about were Louis Vuitton monogram pieces, and someone else also asked specifically about the pochette métisse. So I'll tackle the monogram part of that first. Monogram is obviously incredibly classic. It's something that's been around from Louis Vuitton for decades and decades, so I don't think it's going anywhere. I do think you have to be a bit careful with choosing the style that you get from Louis Vuitton, because even though Louis Vuitton does have its very classic styles of the Speedy and the Neville, and also a few others, you know, there's the Alma BB, they do have quite a few very iconic styles. Louis Vuitton also produce a huge number of new styles every season, but they also discontinue very quickly as well, and unless it's a special limited edition, it usually means as soon as an item is discontinued, people forget about it. If you care about resale value will go down, and so unless it is kind of part of that core group, I would always be a little bit careful about the newer styles until they're kind of a bit more tested. An exception to that, I do think, is the pochette métisse, and if you'd asked me probably 2 or 3 years ago, I think my answer would have been different. I was a little bit skeptical about it. I did have one and it didn't work out for me at all. It's just not really kind of my thing. I found it a bit difficult to style, but I know how amazingly popular this bag is and how it's so many people's favorite bag, and I do get it. And so I think that the pochette métisse has really surpassed everything, and now I do think it's on its way to being a very, very kind of classic status bag, really up there with the Speedy and the Neville. I'll be very surprised if it just completely goes away, even in 5 years' time. I think it's so popular that it has kind of transcended everything else, so TBC, but I do think that this one is going to be around for a long time yet. I also think that's in no small part due to Louis Vuitton's policy of restricting canvas production as well, which I know it's not a very popular policy, but I do think it's worked in terms of generating more hype and buzz about it. You know, they are a lot more difficult to get, and I think that's really helped as well. So I do think that monogram in general is going to be around for a very long time, and you do have to be a bit more careful with the styles that you get, but especially when it comes to the pochette métisse, I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. The next item I was asked about isn't actually a specific bag, but it's hardware, and I think I was asked about gold versus silver hardware, but for me it's just like jewelry. You know, I think there will always be a market for gold jewelry, for silver or white gold jewelry, and everything in between, you know, rose gold, all the variations. So I don't see, you know, one hardware color beating out the other. I just think that there are going to be enough people who like each one to always make sure that you have the variation, the options there. So I don't see one as being more prevalent than the other. I do think that maybe other more alternative hardware styles are more of a passing phase. So the black on black styles became very popular in recent years, and I think they'll continue to be popular for the next couple of years, but I'd be surprised if we were still seeing a lot of black on black styles in 10 years time. I could be wrong, but for me I think it always tends to go back to the more classic options of kind of shiny gold, shiny silver, that sort of thing. And the very last style I'm going to cover are book bags, or rather kind of larger, more canvas-like totes. And I think the person mentioned the Chanel DeVille tote, which is what I have here, the Saint Laurent tote, and also the Dior book tote, if that's what it's called. And I think that my answers do differ according to the different styles. I don't just want to favour the bags that I have, because I think a lot of the bags I have are quite trendy, but I do think of the Chanel DeVille, which I have right here, as slightly different from the Dior book bag, just because of the functionality. And I do think that functionality does play a part in how long something sticks around, because if you have an enormous tote and you can only carry it by the top handle, it's not the most practical, because obviously it's a huge space, but if you fill it with items, that's going to be a really heavy bag, versus the DeVille tote. And this is the smaller one, so you can only carry this on the shoulder, but the larger version you can carry both ways. So I do think of these as slightly different, but the overall concept of big logo totes, I think the general concept isn't going anywhere. I think the flashiness of some of the styles that we're seeing now is probably more of a passing trend, but certainly large totes with logos on them, I think they're probably going to stick around. And for a lot of the styles, I think that they're so fashiony that they're almost insulated from trends, if that makes any sense. And I know you wouldn't think that that was true, but when I was visiting Tokyo, I saw some of the Chanel totes from, gosh, I think it must be over 5 years ago, and they had the kind of Chanel mass symbols on them. And I remember when they first came out, I remember thinking they were super cool. But if you were carrying one down the street, I think it would still look very on trend, even though they were never super crazy popular. So I think it's one of those things that is very fashiony. I don't think a lot of people who aren't really into their bags or fashion would necessarily get it, but I think because of that, they have a longer shelf life. Hopefully that makes sense. It was a bit of a ramble, but to sum up the book bag question, I think that they are going to be around for a while. I think the more practical the style, the better in terms of longevity. And I think the really obvious logo ones, not so classic, but certainly the slightly more subtle ones will probably have quite a good shelf life. So that is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully I covered all the bags that you wanted to know about, but if you have any other questions, then leave them for me down below. If you enjoy these kind of videos, please do give us a thumbs up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next one. Bye, guys.